So this is Hal Herring. I'm up in Augusta, Montana. I host the BHA, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers podcast, and I'm a kind of multi-decade contributing editor at Field and Stream. I do a lot of things, but most involved either writing or forestry or something to keep the lights on. Welcome to the Prairie Farm Podcast.
Nailed it. Perfect.
Nice. Yeah, that was great.
That was good. All right, we'll have some music. Bing, bing, bing. Boom, boom, boom.
I'm keeping that in for sure.
Yeah, right. And here we go. Hal, take us back to the day after this last presidential election and tell us what your hopes, your dreams, your fears were for America's public lands. And maybe, we're talking about a federal election, so maybe we could focus just on federal public land. But what were your feelings on public land going into this new administration?
Wow, that's a huge question. So I'm going to try to think back to whenever it was.
Yeah.
So my fears have not really changed over the past 20 years. That there's been a steady erosion of the understanding of the American people about the American public lands. And I'm working on a book. I'm 5 years into that about this subject because of this specifically.
Yeah.
And I can tell you what the background of how that came to be sometime. But my concerns with this administration, man, they weren't that much different, than they were. Well, in the Republican platform, it's 2016. It explicitly states that they want to privatize or transfer federal public lands to the states. So whenever there's a Republican administration, you have more emphasis on like attacks on the public lands. There's no doubt about that, right? Yeah. And the Democrats have been better with their appointees, over the agencies that manage public lands.
Yeah.
And they've done better with. I mean, they're definitely better. I wouldn't call them the ultimate party of public lands, though.
Right, yeah.
I mean, we don't have that, and we
Right.
should. But my concerns with this administration were that the American people were going to have to be much more engaged if you want to hold on to this incredible idea that started in 1891.
Yep.
With the Forest Reserve Act, and it has been one of the major planetary success stories that, and I just wish more people, the failures, the conflicts get all the headlines, and people, we have not emphasized and understood the successes of this system of American public lands. And buddy, that's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
And no matter who the president is.
Yeah.
What do you mean we haven't outlined the successes of American public lands?
Well, so I tend to be like a history nerd, and
those are welcome here.
yeah, they are, but they're generally unwelcome at the big barbecue.
That's right.
The public lands come from the idea, like they weren't about recreation. They were some of that was in there. They were created to address the failures of what people would call the commons, the tragedy of the commons, or they were addressed the failure of kind of scorched earth resource extraction from both like homesteaders on up to the Kennecott Copper Corporation or the biggest timber harvest. It was just an amazing history, and it worked. And somehow we've lost the thread of the success and have simply concentrated on the conflicts. And there's nothing wrong with having conflicts over a major asset that you inherit. You don't want the family all to join hands and sing Kumbaya while the house that you inherited falls down.
Right.
you want to have Brother Bill over there going like, the roof is awful. And, Sister Jane is over there going, if we don't get rid of these rugs, I'm going to burn this place down, right?
Yeah.
You want conflict. You want people to have, let the best ideas rule. And for some reason, we, as a people, we've become more and more divided and more like interested in these abstract conflicts. And more conflict averse to, say, settling the problem of reintroduction of wolves, or the problem of wetlands loss, or the sustainable, I'm using air quotes there, timber harvest on the national forest. I mean, we need more conflict based on letting the best ideas rule.
Yeah. Yeah, Nick likes to say that you can't be a real friend of his unless you've had a fight with him. Yep. And there's a lot of truth to that, because that's when your real feelings or the real mindsets are shared. And so conflict does push these problems to the forefront.
Kent and I are real good friends. Really,
we fight often, especially on this podcast. Yeah.
Well, and I would add to that after you've brawled around the campfire once or twice, if you really don't, if the friendship was never very good, it's gone.
Right. Yeah.
But if you have these incredibly powerful things in common, then the brawl just makes it more accentuated, right?
Yeah.
You recognize it.
Yeah, it's a great point. We've had a couple. So we've talked about some controversial topics on this podcast, and we've been blown away by the positive feedback through the years, covering these different things. But every now and then you'll get somebody who's real mad at us, because you take, a position on an issue that they don't agree with or whatever. And then they'll end their rant that they have against us or whatever with, and I'm never listening to you ever again, which is fine. Right. But it makes me sad for, like anyone in their life that they're on like
their
such
spouse,
they're on a one strike policy with this person, if you disagree on something. But it's true. Like the lasting relationships and the real problems get solved when you know where people stand, and when you can trust that, hey, we can talk about the hard things and still appreciate one another on the other side of it.
Right.
But I want to get into the conflict of ideas that we're kind of alluding to. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of nuance on tons of different specific properties all across the United States. But there's some big polls. There's the original idea of public lands, that it stays public, that it's still accessible to the public, and that it protects the natural resource. Kind of, I put those in a similar camp, even though they're not the same. And then, even though there's a lot of words, then there's just economic. There's a lot of words to describe that to make it sound sexier, right? Because it's not sexy to say like, well, we'd make more money, But a lot of people say, well, these big companies are just going to make a lot more money. Yeah, that's definitely true. But individuals also, if you can drill for power and have more power available, my whole life gets cheaper. All the groceries get cheaper because shipping them gets cheaper. My electrical bill gets cheaper. My phone bill gets cheaper. Everything in my life gets cheaper. So yes, another company somewhere else is making billions and billions of dollars. But like I get like a 10% reduction in the cost of goods. So there's an economic and there's this original point of view. And if you said we want the best idea to win, how do you define best? And I'm curious. I mean, I have a pretty good idea of what your thoughts are, Hal, but I'd love for you to address that.
Oh, man, no problem. I was, so depending on whether or not we're going to keep digging coal, right? And that's one good example. We've taken, massive amount of coal out of the federal estate over the decades, back to, from the 1970s especially, as a solution to the energy crisis back then, right? And we've drilled an enormous amount and are continuing to of oil and gas on public land. And the beauty, people don't expect me like to say this usually, because I believe that you can develop those resources and not like kill off all the mule deer at the same time, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's a real misunderstanding that the American public lands are somehow not being used for minerals or energy extraction, because they are being used to an extraordinary extent, and probably to the limits that industry wants. I mean, there's tens of thousands of natural gas and oil leases on public land now going unused, undrilled, either because the resource is not particularly valuable, not valuable enough to pay for the cost. What is it? Energy return on energy invested, right? EROI.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Your net.
Or they don't want to drive the cubic feet price of natural gas down by flooding the market, or oil barrel price. But the public lands are very much a part of the economic portfolio of the United States right now. The misinterpretation, the misunderstanding is that somehow these resources are locked up.
Yeah, they're untapped yet. Yeah,
and they are not. They are the leases. I think that every bit of ground that I would say was appropriate to be leased on federal land is leased for energy development now. And there's a thing that people love, and this happened in Montana a lot. I've seen, living here for 35 years. There's this somehow feeling that the government has locked things up, that if they unlocked them, I would be rich.
Yep.
And that, as my friend Sam Western said in an economic treatise on Wyoming once, he said there's this belief that someday there's a helicopter going to come and they're going to unload a geologist, and he's going to find a deposit in our backyard, and he's going to hire us all at top wages to dig it up.
Yeah,
and
right.
So,
yeah.
Until that helicopter shows up, I'm not going to work with my cattle ranch in any different way. I'm not going to make sure the creek's got water in it. It's just somebody hasn't found the thing that's going to make me rich yet. We're sitting on a pool of oil down there that the government won't let us get for some reason. I mean, it goes along with all the conspiracy theories that we saw, like during the public lands conflicts in 2016 with the Bundy family.
Yep.
Where people believed that there was uranium being sold by Nancy Pelosi or Hillary Clinton, and the Chinese were getting it, and we're all being trapped. I couldn't follow it all, right? It was so bizarre.
Yeah.
But it all hinged on this idea that my failures are not my fault. It's because there's all this federal control of these things that would make me rich if they just turned it loose.
Yeah. That is such a good point. So much of the argument around this stuff has centered on, you have to first create discontentment, and then the belief that you have what will provide contentment if your idea will just be accepted. If and that can go on either side. That's not
for sure.
And I think really where a lot of this comes from is we have been convinced that there is a life free of struggle, and I hate to burst bubbles right now, but that's not true.
No, and we have enjoyed a particularly luxurious series of decades that I believe have made people less capable of struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, the danger of civilization, I think Jim Harrison said, is that you will piss away your life on nonsense.
Yeah.
And that rings true to me when I listen to some of these arguments, like for the divestiture of our public lands.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, that's just not a thing. Like, that's not going to be good, and it has to do perhaps with people being protected from the consequences of their own beliefs and actions.
Ooh, Hal. Oh, you're hitting close to home. I for a long time, I've been thinking about writing this book called, maybe 5 years, called it's not the government's fault, it's yours. But
Yeah.
just getting at like you're responsible for your life, and like other chapters being like it's not your spouse's fault, it's yours. It's
Yeah.
you know, it's just like we're so used to it not being our fault, and like if our kid gets a bad grade, well, it's not couldn't be my kid's fault. Let me go yell at the teacher.
It's the
You know what I mean?
teacher. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that hits really close to home. And Kent and I talk a lot about this, but the level of comfort isn't inherently bad. But what are we paying? Someone is paying for my comfort. It might be a 15-year-old kid in Southeast Asia who makes my shirts. It might be someone who's not getting paid enough to grow my vegetables. It might be my kids in 60 years and the health of the earth. But somebody's going to pay for my comfort. And I'm hoping it's me, that I'm paying for it right now. But I just don't think that's the case for us. I think other people are paying for our comfort.
Right. The buck gets passed, but the buck is charged somewhere.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much of life is like, remember those cheapo tile, like those mosaic tile things you get at like a fun fair when you're a kid? It was missing one tile, and you had to slide all the pieces around to fit in, make the picture. So much of that is, I mean, exactly what Nicholas is talking about here. When we go to pursue cheap or comfortable, you're catching a break, but the break it's just like, you know, if you, let's be honest, you want to take a day off from work, well, there's a good chance the people that aren't taking the day off from work, they're picking up some of your slack, maybe not all of it, but some of it, to make sure that you can have your day off from work. Right. And some of those things are very worthwhile to do, and it's part of just being a good human and looking out for each other. But other things, think of the bad roommate in college. That guy was always mooching and always stealing, and so much of that principle carries on in such a bigger way that we don't see it, so therefore we don't even acknowledge that reality exists.
I mean, somebody had to do the dishes eventually, or else there were no plates. Yeah,
that's right.
You know, somebody had to go clean up like his trash.
Yep.
At some point, to bring that back to public lands and conservation, Randy Newberg, who is a great expert on this subject, he used to say a lot. He still does. Conservation is not convenient.
Yeah.
And it is not the day off where you lay around in the sun.
Yep.
And the other thing I could get from Randy on this was the public lands are the result of all of these failures of I wish people understood that we gave away, the federal government took through blood and treasure, through warfare and through payment, right? Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
Yeah.
In the Louisiana Purchase, they took these lands, and they took them from the major powers of the time, and it wasn't, the lands were not just like owned already. The Native Americans were own them. Mm-hmm. And so there were decades of warfare to try to control these lands that people are now arguing over. And then we, the federal government of the United States of America, gave away and sold the vast majority, 2/3 of all the land that we had taken. Homestead Act, Railroad Act, right? The first Homestead Act, 1862. Last one, 1909. John Wesley Powell was going, no, please don't do it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Giving away that arid land, which led to the Dust Bowl.
Yep.
And
that's
so
exactly right.
And so we had overgrazed so much of the Southwest that even a cattleman, great character in America, is called Preston Nutter. And he was this huge cattleman. He drove cows across the Colorado River. And he was one of the first people to go to D.C. and lobby for the Taylor Grazing Act of 1934. Because without that, it was a war of all against all for the last blade of grass.
Yeah, yeah.
And we had wrecked one of the most great treasure houses of natural resources. We had done it. We had logged it off and left the slash so that it burned and took the soil down into the French Broad River in North Carolina. We had done, it was like, they say Churchill said, Americans always do the right thing after they've tried everything else.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
And that's how it was with what became the public lands.
Yeah.
We had tried putting 50,000 sheep in the Wasatch.
Yeah.
And they found out that when all that land collapsed into those creeks at snow melt every year, that the creeks shallowed up and they couldn't make the desert bloom down there with the water.
Yeah.
And so that became one of the first national forests in Utah because they recognized that they had wrecked it and the future of that water. And this is the other thing, people. I need people to know. The National Forest System started in 1891. President Harrison, first forest reserve in Wyoming. It was because the timber was disappearing so fast that they thought that the homesteaders weren't going to be able to get enough logs for a corral. So in Wyoming, so they couldn't give away the land because you hadn't have access to any timber. And so that became the Shoshone National Forest, which so happened to be the wildlife forest where we restored so much of the wildlife for Yellowstone.
Right.
But it was in response to a tremendous market failure.
Yeah.
Right. Some of the early national forests, like the Angeles, that was because Los Angeles wanted water, and people were up there dumping those sheep until there was not a single blade of grass. Yeah. And they have what that's called legacy settlement in the Hudson River. And I was like, what in the world is that, right? Well, it's all of the sediment that came out of the White Mountains and all of the mountains on the east. After they were logged off so hard and the slash left, they burned. And the next year, the ground they had the huge flood in Pittsburgh. They had these huge floods. And they took so much sediment that they couldn't navigate the Hudson.
Wow. That's crazy.
And those are the national forests now, like the Allegheny, the White. Those were set aside as a response to a market failure.
Yeah.
And if you give them away or sell them off now, there's no guarantee that market failure will not be repeated.
Right.
They are where they need to be.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point.
I mean, the BLM lands of Utah, they were not homesteaded because there's no water.
Yeah.
They're incredibly beautiful places. Escalante, Grand Staircase, Bears Ears, incredibly beautiful. They won't put any pounds on cows. If they would put pounds on cows, they would have been homesteaded.
Yep.
The state of Nevada is 73% federal land. People go, oh, man. Man, the federal government gave them the state trust lands back at statehood, and they sold them all off. Everything in Nevada that has water on it, it was homesteaded.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good point. I'm just finishing up The Worst Hard Time, which if you haven't read that before, Hal, I strongly recommend you add it to your list. By Timothy Egan. It covers the Dust Bowl. And something interesting to kind of get into the perspective of the time, which I'm learning. This is like school's in session right now for me. I don't know about you, Nicholas. But a lot of these events, I mean, they just parallel what happened with the Dust Bowl. There's a film that the government produced at the time. Basically, it was a photographer who went down to check out what's going on with this Dust Bowl that everyone's talking about. The people say it's so bad. They've had a couple dust storms, out on the East Coast that supposedly that's dirt from Oklahoma and Colorado and Kansas and Nebraska, and it's blacking out Chicago and stuff like that. Can it really be that bad? And the guy went down there and he was so impacted by the nightmare that it was that he's like, I got to make a film out of this. And he got FDR to basically put money towards putting it together to put it to play in local movie theaters. And you can see that whole film on YouTube. It's called The Plow That Broke the Plains. Wow. And it just gives you an idea of the kind of the realization that Hal's talking about here with oh, wow, maybe we did do this all wrong. And ultimately what it led to was the United States, I want to say it was reassignment administration or something like that, where they would come in, they would pay you for your now worthless ground. I mean, the ground was totally denuded of any vegetation other than Russian thistle, and which most people know as tumbleweed, and sand dunes. And they came in because people were basically just stuck on this moonscape. They paid them, I think it was like $2 an acre for all this land that, as Hal mentioned, they got from the land grabs. Historically, their grandparents got it or whoever. And I believe that land has been returned to the public trust. I believe it is now public land in that area. And there's a whole process with Hugh Bennett starting the NRCS and the shelter belt tree plantings and planting native grasses, but also grasses from Africa, just because they wanted vegetation that could handle a desert environment. And that whole fallout was exactly as Hal said, where, man, we did everything that we thought was right. We did everything that the government promoted, and we ended up with the surface of Mars. And
it wasn't a fault. It wasn't at fault. The homesteaders in eastern Montana. So you're nailing it, Kent, because I wanted to show you this book, Planting Hope on Worn Out Land. That's Tuskegee National Forest.
Now I got one I got to read.
so that's that reassignment bill that you're talking about. They had all these sharecroppers that were George Washington Carver was teaching at Tuskegee at that time in Alabama.
Okay, yeah.
And they did what they could to try to bring new farming techniques, but it was worn out. There's another book that comes from that time in Georgia, Alabama, called "And Now Let Us Praise Famous Gullies."
Okay.
And it was just the land was destroyed, and it was. This was post-slavery, and during the sharecropping era, right?
Yeah, yep.
So a lot of that, Bankhead National Forest, Talladega National Forest, these are Alabama. Tuskegee National Forest, Conecuh National Forest, all of those came from that time.
Wow.
And when you're talking about Hugh Bennett, so they signed, Soil Conservation Service became the NRCS.
Right.
And they signed that into being while the dust was flying into Washington. That's the famous day.
That's right. Yeah, they talk about that in the book. They said he was giving this impassioned, presentation on why we need this, and all of a sudden, one of the people in on that meeting, I guess you can call it, presentation, said he's like, "Hey, look outside," and you could literally see the dust cloud that Hugh Bennett has been like, "Hey, you guys don't understand how terrible it is out there. All the soil is just blowing around, and here comes this duster sweeping in on D.C." And it was like unanimous from that second on. They brought life to the soil conservation district concept.
One of the things you're talking about too, that those lands that ended up in the public trust. So most of that is the national grasslands system. Yep. Cimarron. Is one of my favorite stories. I'm trying to remember exactly. I've never been to it, but they really went. They were broke down there.
Oh yeah.
There was a thing in Nebraska called the Kincaid Act that gave away the sand hills.
Okay.
And that one really became a disaster. They called them the Kincaiders, and they were just out there trying to make it, in the sand hills where you can't.
Well, you know what. This book closed a gap for me in my understanding. Since the first time I read it, the Sandhills have become one of my favorite places. I've gone out there and hunted mule deer, and then I got a friend who ranches out there, and he invites me out to go shed hunting every spring. And he's like, "Yeah, it's kind of a phenomenon is we have all these ponderosa pines, and they're not really from here. I mean, they're native to North America, of course. I think Colorado is probably the closest they are to Nebraska, their native range, but well, sure enough, in the book, it talks about they planted all these, and it must have just been exactly what you're talking about, taking the land back and establishing some vegetation.
Well, trying to, and I mean that's kudzu down south, right?
Yeah,
kudzu crowns. That was to hold those gullies. They built check dams in the gullies, and they put kudzu crowns. And it worked. I mean, it was a terrible invasive, from Korea, but it worked. And then out where I am was crested wheat, right? Crested wheatgrass.
Okay.
And you can go and look at all the ground that went belly up in, say, the 30s and 40s. In the 50s, we planted crested wheat on it. That was Soil Conservation Service stuff.
Sure.
And then I always look at, like, the natural grasslands are one of my favorite things because they really come from devastation. Mm-hmm. And they look pretty good. Thunder Basin, it's got prairie, like sharp-tailed grouse and mule deer and all. And if you knew its history, you would think it was impossible.
Yeah.
And so I love the natural grasslands. They are managed by the U.S. Forest Service, which is kind of ironic. But up here we have, New Mexico has some too, called the Bankhead Jones lands. Okay, yep. And those were specifically picked up after the destruction of the Dust Bowl. Mm-hmm. And they were totally abandoned. And they knew they had to do something with them because they were moonscaped out there. And they were an economic loss to those counties, right? Yeah. And so the federal government took them over back into the public domain under the Bankhead Jones Act. This was in the 1920s, I think, 30s. Okay. I'm trying to remember. It was a great idea. The lands were restored at taxpayer expense. All the Americans shared in the cost. And then they were leased for grazing. And that money went back to public education, land grant universities, etc. And of course that was Senator Bankhead from Alabama, right? Yeah. They had all passed what's called the Weeks Act of 1911, which allowed the federal government to buy and restore land in the South. And the first Weeks Act forest is the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina. And that one was the result of absolutely unrestrained logging forever. Yeah, yeah.
I think we just lost Nick because we have a power outage here, but I think he'll be back here shortly. All right. Yeah, all this stuff connects together, and
it does.
And it's such a good, I guess, representation of what you talked about with this land exists where it does because nothing else. We've tried it. We've tried to have other things there. Obviously, not everywhere. There's places of Alaska that I'm convinced you could almost be the first person to set foot on there in maybe a couple millennia. Right. But in large part, a lot of the places that are public land, which is also that's kind of a depressing thing as well because. Is that all that we allow to be the wild places are the least prime places, and it kind of relates to the prairie conservation world as well because there's species that, just like we know of nasty invasive species like multiflora rose, who likes walking through a big old bush of that, or up north buckthorn or something like that, rips the snot out of you and catches all your gear on it and everything else. Well, there's native species that do the same thing, but they have a place in the ecosystem. And, one that we get requests for all the time is, hey, I love the mix, but can you keep the tick trefoil out of it? I hate that getting in my dog's fur when I go pheasant hunting or all over my clothes. Or can you keep the Canada wild rye out of it because the fronds on that can get up my dog's nose and which is fine. It's better to get, a good prairie should have, over 100 species in it. But if I can get 20, that's better than just smooth brome. But I think sometimes too, just like with this case with public land, if we only allow the public land to exist, on the least prime real estate, I think we're missing a gap in what could be here too. That's by and large, that's why we don't have elk and bison back in Iowa. Right. It's because they need a lot of space, and so does corn and bean farming. Right. And so it highlights another reality, I think.
So I'll take the devil's advocate. The conservative, and I'm doing air quotes again because I don't think modern conservatism, I don't think it's what it was set out to be. Right. But the conservative viewpoint here, that you need a big tax base of private land wherever possible. Like, this is going to be Teddy Roosevelt would have said this too. And so what we need to do with that is to incentivize the private landowner to create more native prairie for pollinators and ecosystem resilience. And the National Wildlife Refuges have some pretty good land, you know. But I don't think we're ever going to have prime farmland in the public domain.
Mm-hmm.
I think that bird has flown if it ever existed.
Yeah. I think you're right.
I think what we need is a renaissance in the NRCS and the federal government. And I think we could talk about this some other time, but you talk about the administrations, you know.
Yeah.
This administration has made itself very clear about what they value, right?
Yes.
And they value economic churn. They value more money coming from X, Y, or Z. They've cut the staff at the national forests. They've cut the staff on the BLM. They've cut the budgets to the parks, right?
Yep.
So they don't value that, right? And that's okay. Like, we voted for change.
Right, yep.
And this is the change that we got. This is part of it.
Right.
So it's now incumbent upon the American people to say, well, we want this. We want parks. We want clean water. We want public lands. We have to say it overtly. You can't just assume that somebody else is taking care of the shop.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But and part of that is NRCS, and these I just look at NRCS as it could be the most powerful. We could do so much.
Yes.
With private land incentives.
Mm-hmm.
And then manage public land for the multiple use concept, which was established in 1976 with the Federal Land Management Policy Act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, all of this stuff. I wish people also knew how complicated it was for us to have a functioning country like we have.
Yeah.
And how much politics it took and how many engaged citizens it took to pass the Clean Water Act or pass the Federal Land Policy Management Act and the Clark-McNary Act, which expanded the national forests in the South to include watershed other than just timber, watershed protection. Like, people thought about this. Americans got up early and stayed late working on these problems, and we're the beneficiaries of that.
Yep.
The beneficiaries, and we seem to go like, I don't know, I guess it was magic.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. You know, it's part of the it's probably overused, but this idea of, you know, what's the phrase? Hard times produce hard people produce soft times produce soft people. Soft people produce hard times.
Yeah, man. Totally.
And we're kind of in that phase. As you said, we've had several decades now of, you know, kind of peace and quiet and comfort and success and wealth. And, you know, that's led to some laziness and some slack and some, you know, not prioritizing everything that we should be prioritizing. Yeah. And so it's important that we stay active and, you know, considerate of what has been accomplished. And again, kind of going back to the beginning of the conversation, when we can be convinced that we should be discontent and that we don't have enough and here's what we're missing. When we can be sold on that, then, you know, we can become complacent and be willing to mortgage some pretty good stuff to try and chase something that may or may not even exist, and definitely will not leave us 100% satisfied.
I want my great-grandchildren to be able to take a tin cup and drink out of the Des Moines River.
That's a dream right there.
Yeah. I want them to go down to New Orleans and fish off the boardwalk, the moonwalk down there. Yeah. And reach down, be able to drink the water and eat the fish and have and look at the most incredible river on earth and know that we took care of it.
Yep. I love that.
That's basic economics too, man.
Yeah.
It's not economics to tear your house down because you're too lazy to fix the roof.
Right. Right.
That's not economics. Economics is not to and we're going to talk about minerals on public land, right?
Yep.
Economics is not to have the 1872 mining law, which has never been reformed because of political lunacy.
Right.
Give away the minerals to foreign governments, foreign companies, and leave us with the toxic mess. You don't stop mining. You get rid of the 1872 mining law and make it work for America. America first.
Yep.
And then you can mine copper. You can mine all these things. But you can't let somebody from Chile or some other, I don't know what other country, China, mine all of your minerals and take them away.
Yeah.
And then
take
leave
away
you the mess.
Literally your wealth. Yeah.
That's yes. And strategic minerals as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Things that push technological advancement. Yeah.
I mean, the 1872 mining law is Exhibit A of one of the problems we have with American public land management. And it's not too much public land.
Yeah. Right.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, we can fix these things. Dude, who wrote the Forest Reserve Act in 1891? We did.
Yeah.
I mean, who solved these problems that has destroyed countries across the world? We did.
Right. Well, and, what plays into this too, and really you were kind of discussing this at the beginning of our conversation, is people have become not just convinced that they should be discontented or whatever, but they've lost track of even the value of what our public land has to offer. And I think you and I, both being from the hunting and fishing community, we still don't have Nicholas back yet, guys. We have a power outage. It's been a stormy day here. I think he'll jump on when he gets a chance here. But we've lost track of what public lands provide to us, and we talked about they're kind of these restored areas that were once completely, exhausted of all resource. So there is that aspect of them. But I was listening to another podcast the other day where it's an interesting podcast because it's largely hosted by billionaires and 100 millionaires. And those are people that have a really, a really tight understanding of what's going on politically here and around the world, and that's how they've gotten so wealthy, right? They've learned how politics affect what's marketable, and then how to capitalize on that. And so it's interesting to listen to their perspectives. Well, they were talking about something that Secretary Burgum had mentioned about how, look at these examples of these leases that the United States has handed out, but has not allowed for extraction to, begin happening. And they're like, he was telling me about permits that were 30 years old, and they still haven't had any extraction happen yet. And to these guys who, to my knowledge, none of them hunt or fish, and if they do, I'm going to guess it's not on public land. It was so common sense, like, whoa, that is just unbelievable. 30-year-old permit, and it still isn't working. And I was just thinking, man, you guys know so much about how things work, but you clearly don't understand the value of our public lands, because it doesn't come across your desk. It's not something that and I'm not saying that they're dumb by any means. They're very, very, very intelligent people.
Right.
But it's just not on their radar. And I think that interaction between those four people talking about public land extraction, I think it probably was a good sampling of where a lot of Americans are that don't hunt and fish, and so therefore do not they don't follow an organization like BHA, which exists to promote the good things that are provided to us by our public lands. And as a result, they just aren't aware, right? They aren't aware of what it is that's happening there. Can we talk a little bit about, outside of hunting and fishing and extraction, what the everyday American really gains from these public lands.
Yeah, for sure. And one, I would say, having some familiarity with the APD process, application for a permit to drill on public land, those guys are getting a twisted information.
Right.
Because APDs are processed and approved, and the private entity gets to drill that or not.
Yeah.
Right. And there were at times mule deer winter range restrictions and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But in areas of the West that had a particularly powerful resource, say natural gas, those APDs were approved in spite of being in winter range for mule deer under a thing called the categorical exclusion, the famous Cat X.
Yeah.
Which resulted in a huge reduction in the number of mule deer, say, in Pinedale, Wyoming. Because they drilled there for natural gas in winter range under the categorical exclusion. So I would say that those guys are doing what I would call confirmation bias, and they don't know exactly how the Bureau of Land Management issues permits.
Yeah.
They're probably very busy people, and they get a sound bite or a McNews bite about these permits. And then that confirms a bias they already have against our government and against, say, environmental laws.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go ahead and have that opinion.
Yeah.
So I would encourage those billionaires to go a little deeper into the federal lands management, the actuality of federal lands management.
Yeah.
To go back to your point, Walt Dabney has he's a lifelong superintendent of parks in Utah, and he's on the road now doing a public lands presentation, which answers so many of these questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's Walt Dabney is my go-to at the moment. He's an older guy. He's done this for years. And Walt and I did an interview with him recently. He was 30 years National Park Service, and then he went home to Texas and was superintendent of the Texas State Parks and was responsible with his team to kind of a resurgence in public land in Texas, of which there's almost none.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Very little.
So Walt said to me something about the public lands and what they offer all of us, hunters, fishermen, mountain bikers, and people who may never even visit them, is that they are at a time of absolute abstraction, phones and internet and worries about your health care bill. They offer a grounding in the real world.
I like
and
that.
He said, this is Americans finding grounding.
Yeah, I like that.
In the land, right?
Yeah.
In a time when that is really it's getting more rare, right?
Yep.
And so for somebody who lives, say, in Birmingham, Alabama, who may not ever go to the Talladega National Forest or I have a friend that's younger than me now. He's from Alabama. He's always been younger than me. But he's on this extended 1 year hiatus from his construction job, and he's just going around the West.
Oh, I love that.
I've never seen anybody as excited. He's 40 years old. He's in really good shape, and he's a mountain biker, kayaker. He hunts whitetails a lot.
Sure.
But he's just on this experiential immersion. And I had nothing to do with this. This was something he wanted to do for a long time. I didn't even know he was going to do it.
Yeah.
And he's getting it, man.
Yeah.
He's been mountain biking in Moab. He was going to go for 2 weeks. He's been there for 5. He was there for 5 weeks. He couldn't leave.
Wow.
And the freedom of it all, the freedom to go and experience these American lands was just, it blew his mind, right?
Yeah.
And now he's going to come up here and visit us, and we're going to go back in the Bob Marshall Wilderness.
That's awesome.
This is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think what you're describing there is one of our greatest expressions of freedom as Americans is being able to just go to a vast area. And I mean, there's still laws and guidelines, and even if you're hunting, you can walk around with a gun in a public place, which is a pretty long leash given to you by the government. But you still have a tag that you gotta purchase, or you still have a hunting license you need to, and then laws that you gotta abide by. But so I'm not saying there's no restrictions at all. However, it's quite a bit of freedom. Or I often think of the ability to go just build a fire somewhere.
Yeah.
If you're into bird watching, you just have such a better chance of running into a greater amount of biodiversity in these areas than you do if you didn't have access to them. If you just had to, kind of be from the edge of the property boundary looking in with your binoculars, you're just not going to get the experience you can where if you go like your friend is doing right now and swing by the Tetons and go out to Joshua Tree and go out to up into New England and go to what's the place where the sun rises first? That national park that's Arcadia, right?
Arcadia, right?
Go up to Arcadia, or go down to Talladega, or even here, go to Effigy Mounds here in Iowa and see the beauty there, and also a history significance, a historical significance. Effigy Mounds, that's one of my favorite things about that place is you're looking at the construction of Iowans that were here over 1,000 years ago,
right,
and that were loving this same place that I love, and that were looking at the same sunrise, and were having their own hopes and dreams that all tied to the land. And that's what public land allows us to experience here as Americans. And I really do. I think it is our greatest expression of our freedoms when we go and enjoy public land. And I love private land. I think it's been interpreted when we talk about public land before that we don't value private land. Absolutely. We operate a prairie farm here on private acres, and I enjoy hunting them. And we have a mutual friend in Doug Duran, and sharing the land has brought some public land aspects to private land. Of course, it's a something that is carefully, it's shared, and there's a selective process and so forth, and you put skin in the game. But so I love private land and what it provides, but absolutely our public lands, I think, are our greatest expression of freedom when we go on them and enjoy them in the way that we want to.
I agree, and here's the thing. So also, not only are they the best idea for those acres, right? They take nothing away from private land. The two things are totally symbiotic.
Yes, absolutely.
In fact, the taxes paid on private land, if you want to get in economics, pay for the management on public land. Right?
Yeah.
Because if the public land, as I said before, it's not going to put pounds on cows.
Right.
And it's not going to give you all the timber that you want because it's in the arid West.
Right. Yep.
But it will give you some timber, and it will put some pounds on cows managed correctly, right?
Yep.
But you still got this is why the transfer of lands to the states was such a devilish idea. Is because the states don't have the budgets to do that.
Right.
The expenses for managing our federally managed public lands, which are our lands, they're not owned by the government. They're owned by us and managed in trust by the government. So those expenses are paid because all taxpayers share in that burden.
Yep.
Right? If you were to transfer those lands to Utah, they would have to tax the state residents exponentially more to cover these things.
Yeah, that's such a great point.
And what would happen was people wouldn't put up with that.
Right.
And they would sell those lands to the highest bidder. Some of them the worst of it, just the old sand, would probably be left for you to ride your motorcycle on, I guess.
Yeah.
But all of the rest of it, man, the Kaparowitz Plateau, all of that incredible land in Utah that we can just wander at will right now, which is managed by the Bureau of Land Management, it would be gone.
Yep, I agree.
And it's the economics do not work out for the transfer of these lands to the states. Yeah,
that's a great point where we can transition here a little bit. So we saw here just recently there was an attempt. The reason Hal's talking about Utah is because, and Nevada earlier, is because those were two states that were looking for an opportunity. And this has happened before. I think, what was it, back in 2016?
2012. And
2012. There was a real attempt at offloading some federal land, and I believe it was Utah who was leading the charge at that time. And this time around, Utah was involved, but it was much more so Nevada that was pushing for this transfer. And the opportunity that was sought in this case was they were going to work it into what is now been titled the Big Beautiful Bill. It's a budget for the 2026 fiscal year, I believe, it's our federal budget, right? And it was worked in as these subcommittees were looking at their different bits of legislation that they wanted to maybe attach to this bill. The Natural Resources Subcommittee worked in literally in the 11th hour. All the other budget stuff, blah, 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 that's in there, pretty, vanilla stuff. Let's also throw in there that we sell off, and I guess it was later revealed Onyx had done some digging around in this. I think it was originally proposed to be around 150,000 acres, and that turned out some folks were saying was more likely around 500,000 acres.
And more.
And more. Okay. So thankfully, though, that our House of Representatives, as they were reviewing this proposal that was passed on to them by this Natural Resources Subcommittee, they took that out and then left it out of the Big Beautiful Bill. And so we feel like we dodged one there. What's going to be the next, the ongoing strategy? Because there's definitely been strategy to this game of trying to divest from federal lands. What do you predict is coming down the pike for this in the future?
More of the same.
Okay.
And defunding. So there's a thing that's been going on for 30 years called defund and decry, where Congress takes so here's a problem that we had. So the environmentalists on one side and the extractive industry people on the other side have been at odds for so long, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that we forgot is they both were like angry at the U.S. Forest Service or the BLM.
Internet.
Furious, right? So these federal land management agencies didn't have a lot of friends. And so it was easy in Congress to cut those budgets to the bone year after year. I'm not talking about Doge. I'm talking about 25, 35 years ago, 50 years ago under Reagan. And that was called defund and decry. So you go to your national forest and nobody's cleaned up the campground because it doesn't have a budget for it. And nobody's cleared the trails. And you say, oh man, this is not working. We took the money away from them, and now they're not doing the work. And now we're furious. I lost you for a minute.
Hey Hal, sorry. So that whole time we have these backup power sources because years ago the power went out and they crashed the computers. They lost all their files, but that thing just ran out of battery right as
Gotcha.
right as you were making your point there. So I'm on my hotspot on my phone. We can continue here on my hotspot. I think just fine. So sorry about the interruption there. I think let's see. You were saying the more of the same.
Yeah, it's so I'm not. what we've been dealing with for 3 decades is what we call defund and decry. And this predates Doge and the literal like layoff and attack on the federal land management agencies that are recent, right? So the National Forest, say the U.S. Forest Service and the BLM, they have been asked to do, the parks too, but I'm talking about federal public land that's not parks. They've been asked to do more with less for about 50 years now. Mm-hmm. And one of the problems with that is when the trails aren't cleared or the campground is messy because they didn't have enough staff to clean it up.
Right.
The public that owns these lands has said, well, obviously this is not working.
Yeah. And
so the privatization movement, the people who want to, these are the land grabbers that Bernard DeVoto wrote about in 1937, 1948,
That's
1952.
Crazy.
The land grabbers are going like, campground's all messy, isn't it? Wouldn't it be better if I owned it and you just paid me a little fee to use it? Now he doesn't say that you're not ever going to be able to use it again. He's going to build his mansion there.
Right, yeah.
But this strategy has been going on for 50 years at least. Yeah. Strangling the budgets, making sure that management can't take place, and then pointing out the failures of the management as a reason for us to give away our lands.
Yeah.
And it's become kind of almost cartoonish at this point, right?
Yeah.
But because the objective is to destroy these land management agencies so that they can't manage the land, and then we'll have no alternative. We have to give up our asset.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I resent that as an American.
Yeah.
I don't like being tricked.
Yeah.
I don't like being played for a sucker. And buddy, let me tell you something about that bill that was shoved into the budget bill of the sell-off of the 500,000 acres. Allegedly, it was more than that. So that bill was an absolute. It was really bad.
Yeah.
I'm telling you,
Yeah.
You don't. Okay, so, and being a nerd, I can tell you that in 1998, we passed it's called the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act of 1998, right? This is not that long ago.
Right, yeah.
And what that was, was it was to allow Las Vegas, Clark County, to expand on the Bureau of Land Management American Public Lands because they needed more room. They needed some infrastructure. So that bill exists. It wasn't particularly successful. We kind of got shafted, but a lot of BLM land was put into private hands.
Sure.
So the people who embedded that bill just recently to sell off these lands, they had to know about the 1998 Act.
Yeah.
They had to know. So instead, the 1998 Public Lands Act, which is, if you can just research this, Clark County, Nevada, they needed Bureau of Land Management lands. They needed public lands to do infrastructure projects for Las Vegas. The act was passed so that the American people got fair value for the land that was being sold or traded.
Yeah.
Okay? This is very important. That bill that went in recently was going to bypass that so that the American people did not get fair value for the land that was taken from us.
Wow. So they were gonna totally.
So now it was a heist.
Yeah. Yeah. That's unbelievable.
I believe that people are usually in good faith.
Yeah.
And I don't look for this kind of thing, but buddy, that's what happened.
Yeah.
And you can't. Yeah. It doesn't help. It doesn't help to be a Pollyanna and pretend that bad things don't happen, because they do.
Yeah. 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 That's absolutely true. You know, I oftentimes wonder, and I think a lot of people also wonder about this. The folks that are wanting to sell the land or are wanting to maybe just. I mean, we talked about the strategy there of handing over more control to states so that the state itself has more control, and then they can say, "Oh, look, we don't have the resource. Do you want us to tax you more to manage this land, or should we just sell it off?" So we talked about that motivation, but what is the motivation for beyond that situation? Like, who's the winner if public lands are being sold? Who's going to benefit from that ultimately?
Well, real estate development. Although around St. George, Utah, there would be water issues. Another thing that Americans have done, because we've been so kind of protected over the last few decades, is we've embraced this kind of magical thinking, especially the business community, that there'll always be plenty of water. And we'll just find it somewhere, and we can support, I don't know. Another thing that's pushing this is that we're the fastest growing developed nation in the world.
Yeah.
And so people are wanting, and they have a lot of prosperity, so they want more land, more buying of the desert, right?
Right.
They're not worried. They're not thinking about where the water is going to come from.
Right.
But all that aside, and you can forgive a county too. So counties are paid what's called public payment in lieu of taxes for a fee for all the federal public land that's within their boundaries.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's called PILT, P-I-L-T. And counties can be forgiven, especially, not forgiven. I understand it. If you're a county commissioner in San Juan County, Utah, and you're getting all this payment in lieu of taxes money from the federal government, but you could get more if a wealthy person built a big neighborhood out there and it was taxed as residential. Yeah. You'd have more money in your county. Now, whether you'd have the water for that, I don't know. Whether you would destroy what's left of the desert. Right, all that, right? They're true, but you would have more money in the coffers, and that's something I totally understand. I don't begrudge a single county commissioner in Nevada or Utah for seeing that picture and saying, "I want that."
Right.
Okay, so but the answer to that is in the Southern Nevada Land Management Act of 1998. There is a mechanism for doing this. And if St. George, Utah needs more land for, I don't believe for a second they're going to build affordable housing on it. But if they want, if they want to expand the city, But if they want to expand the city, the mechanism exists for them to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And they will get if they can provide the water and the services, they will have some tax revenue coming in. I totally understand that. I totally support bringing more payment in lieu of taxes to counties that need it. Right? Yeah. It's an expensive world. It costs a lot to maintain roads and have a quality of life that people want to see. But these are budget problems.
Yeah.
And they will not be solved by selling off that public land that has already been restored from the abuses of the past.
Yeah.
And taking away the freedom of the American people for a one-time infusion of cash.
Yes. And I believe
it doesn't make sense, man.
Right. I believe we totaled up. We did the math. I think if you sold all of the federal land at, I want to remember, I think it was $3,500 an acre or something like that. We figured was like a good. Some would of course be more than that, but a lot would be even less than that. But we tallied that up, and it wasn't even going to come close to the federal deficit. The debt. It was, and it's like you said, it's a one-time infusion of cash, and then it's gone. Now what? And I just think I think that it's such a short-sighted thing, but it's important to know winners and losers there. Something we talked about previously on the podcast is having a reasonable, and it sounds like that's what you're striving to have, a reasonable outlook on this. Nicholas, who still does not have internet, unfortunately, the storm stopped. I don't understand why we don't have power right now, but we do not have power, and Nicholas does not have internet. I am hotspotting from my phone right now. But he told an example of in the town where he lives, which is Knoxville, Iowa, there was a old VA hospital that was really quite large. It was kind of a hub location, I think, and some legislation passed where they said, you know what, we're going to quit funding this location. We're going to pull all resources out of it. And now you just have this old decaying infrastructure in this, not tiny town, but not huge town either. And this town can't do anything with it because it's under federal ownership. It's an old VA hospital. Right. It's all developed around it. It's not like it's got, natural areas on it. It's just a unmowed, old
right.
hospital campus. And recently they were able to sell that land to, I think there was some local private investors who bought some of it, but I also think the town of Knoxville was given some of the control, and they put up some public parks or something there in its place. To me, in those very rare circumstances, the sale can make sense. I think Meteor just had a episode, I don't know, a month ago or so, 3 weeks ago, where they interviewed Tim Sheehy, and he talked about a warehouse in Gary, Indiana, that was like a 3-acre warehouse or something that just sits empty and has been sitting empty since shortly after World War II, and it's all urban development around it. Do you think there are some times where it makes sense, or are you so fearful of the slippery slope of once you start opening up that door, which I believe the slippery slope is not a fallacy. I believe it is a real threat. I think you can see that many times over through history, that once the cookie starts crumbling, it just keeps on going. But what do you think on issues like those, very rare, and really what I would call an outlier circumstance?
I don't even know if it's an outlier. I think there's lots of land, federal property that could be slated for other uses. Just not the public estate of like the Forest Service and the BLM and the national parks, right?
Right.
But even that, that Southern Nevada Policy Act provides for, if you can make the case that you need that land, you can buy it. You can do it as long as the American people get a fair return for the loss. Or the trade, which was also part of this. Trading for conservation was part of that. We know how to do this, Kent.
Yeah.
And the problem with this is, so here's the big problem though. It's the camel's nose under the tent or the foot in the door. Is the people who are in bad faith here, the people who are in truly bad faith, they want to take the lands over, and they know that the American people will not accept that at this point.
Yeah.
The people who are doing that are blocking that very thing. So I don't know if y'all have ever done, like if you look at the Endangered Species Act.
Right, yep.
Obviously, there is much room for improvement in the Endangered Species Act. It's mostly sticks and no carrots, right?
Yeah.
But the people who hate the Endangered Species Act and have attempted to get rid of it from the beginning have blocked any chance of reform.
Yeah.
Because regular people, centrist people, cannot give them an inch because they are in bad faith. They want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
The same is true of this privatization of our public lands movement. They are in bad faith.
Yeah.
And they are making an argument that blocks
That's such a good argument.
Logical study of what lands we can divest. it's the problem with an all or nothing scorched earth ideology.
Yeah.
You can't negotiate with that.
Yeah, I think that is such a good argument. It's where the person is coming from and what is their ultimate goal, and you can talk a lot of sense. You can say a lot with a smile on your face, and the meaning isn't there, or it's steeped in hypocrisy, or it's loaded with double meaning or false pretenses or motivations. And I think that is a great example of how we can look at that. They're almost two separate. Yes, they're both federal lands, but they're coming from two totally different proposers, I guess you could say.
Right. So one of the things that we're going to have to solve in the next few decades is the problem of the checkerboard, which we could do a whole podcast on that. And
that's
Cal
so
and Meat Eater have done that.
Yeah.
But it's so complicated. But we have a checkerboarded where one section is public and the next section is private all through northern Nevada, especially.
Yeah.
And we have it in the crazy mountains in Montana. So eventually we're going to need to solve that.
Mm-hmm.
But through land trades. And
Yeah.
we're going to do that with no net loss to American public lands. Okay?
Yep.
But in order to address that problem, we have to marginalize the voices of those who want to take it all.
Yeah.
Because they are blocking any logical discussion of solving this problem.
Right.
The more problems there are, this is the defund and decry. Okay?
Yep.
The more conflict, the more problems there are, the more they say, well, why don't you just get rid of all of it? It's just not capable. We just can't solve it, can we?
Right. Yep.
And I compare that to inheriting a mansion and you decide to give it away because your brother-in-law can't stand the kitchen fixtures or the bathroom fixtures. And the family all meets and goes like, we just got to get rid of the mansion. I can't believe it, but we don't have to burn it down. We can just give it to these guys down the road.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
And that those guys down the road are down the road are on the porch saying to you, man, that roof is awful. You don't want to fix that. Oh, don't you hate it when your brother uses the house?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
It's
Wouldn't it be better if you didn't have the house to argue over?
Yeah. It's cutting off your leg to lose weight.
It's awful.
It's
yes.
It's just so short-sighted and so permanent too. Yeah, it's
such a scam.
Yep.
I mean, I just get tired. I get tired when I think most of us are in good faith and we treat our neighbors right and we don't want to take things that aren't ours.
Yep.
And in this case, we just have a whole movement that is just not that way at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it makes me sad. It kind of makes me sad. Like, why can't we have nice things?
Yeah, right. Well, and I mean, it should cause all of us. It should cause all of us to do some soul searching and what is it we value and why, and maybe even plan. We had someone on this podcast years ago who Tabitha Panis is her name. And there's a podcast coming out, and a new interview with Tabitha soon, where she talks about some of her experience as an NRCS employee who was, I guess, a victim of the what do they call the Valentine's Day massacre this year from the Doge firings, and she once said the way you get people to value prairie is by getting them to spend time in one. And they can see the diversity of life.
Yep.
They can see the new flowers and grasses that they've never seen before. And they can smell the blooming flowers and all that, and hear the different birds singing, and all of that will convince them of its value. And I think that we're recording this on June 3rd. A lot of summer ahead. Most families have some time at some point in the summer to go and do a little traveling. Find some public land, that you think your family would enjoy. If it's got to be something close, find it in your own state. But if you got, maybe a week a vacation, it doesn't have to be the whole vacation, but maybe plan for a half day or a day to go and do some hiking or a cookout or maybe even pitch a tent, and just try and connect with that public land. And if you do see some of the mess that Hal talked about, don't just chalk it up to lazy, tax-wasting government employees. Maybe start seeing it as, this could be part of a bigger plan here to try and motivate you through your disgust to want to divest from this land. And I think maybe that's where some of the volunteering work that BHA or other conservation advocacy groups out there be a good way to maybe lend a hand and help prevent that strategy from being successful from those who want to divest. Go and lend some time and expertise in ways that you have it to help clean up and keep the place looking good. But there's
engage.
Yeah.
Engage.
Be engaged. Spending time there, I think, is what will convince you the most of why this is so valuable, not just for the here and now. And that's the other side of this. To me, there's very few things where we have to be so dedicated to the here and now. We oftentimes live our way in that balance, though, which I would say is imbalanced, where we focus so hard on right now, and yet, if you go back to, if all of us thought back right now to the year 2015 and thought, okay, what were my biggest stressors at work in 2015? You probably couldn't even remember them. Yet in 2015, they dominated almost, a huge percentage of your mental space and emotional fortitude in 2015. But here we are 10 years later, and you can't even remember what they were. And it's kind of the same thing here, where there's this, those who would like to divest prey on that reality of the here and now. Look, we need housing now. We got to have it now. We got to have this money be available for this problem. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes there is a very urgent, immediate, existential threat that we got to address. But oftentimes it's not the case. And playing the long game usually is the best route to go. And I think that it's important to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, totally. I was there's in 4 years, if I'm still kicking,
well, I sure hope so.
And we'll talk, because what we're gonna do is what we're being asked now with the Doge, with the defunding, with the recent attack on Land and Water Conservation Fund. None of this is new.
Yeah.
This has all been going on at least since Ronald Reagan, and probably since after FDR, right?
Yep.
So what we're going to do, Kent, is we have finally, as the American people, we have finally been asked, what is it that you believe in? What do you want? Because we're going to cut this, and if you want it, you have to speak up, right?
Yeah.
So we have gone through the time of weak men and weak people, whatever you call that
right.
thing you were quoting, which I agree with. We have left that time, and now we have to insist. We are not going to give up our grandchildren's ability to cross the Kaparowitz Plateau or to go canoeing down the Mississippi and not be poisoned.
Yeah.
We are going to tell you what the American people want. And that, buddy, we are going to build an NRCS like you've never seen before. We are going to build a public lands management that provides for more local employment.
Yeah.
Prioritizes watershed protection in a changing climate and more irrigation stressors. We're going to prioritize our public lands. This is my belief.
Yeah.
And we're going to rebuild this. We have been complacent for so long. Now we're being slapped in the face and say, "Well, I thought you wanted this."
Yeah.
Well, we didn't want this. We'll tell you what we want, and we are in America. You consent to be governed.
Yep.
You're not governed by a big baseball bat with nails stuck in it. We consent to be governed to serve a larger purpose and a greater good.
Yeah.
And we're going to rebuild this because this is the moment where we see what was broken already.
Yeah.
And we are going to fix it. I have this. I see a Bureau of Land Management in the future doing incredible things with lots of people from St. George, Utah, and Escalante working at the BLM, restoring rangelands, and helping people move cows when they need to. I see sustainable timber harvest to, and yes, they will be federally subsidized, to small local mills that provide lumber to small local economies.
Yeah.
You know, I see beef production on public land that provides a kind of a co-op model where local communities have beef produced right there on their public lands.
Yeah.
They're not shipped off to a feedlot.
Right.
I see a renaissance, man. I can see it, and I don't think I'm wrong.
Yeah, I love that attitude.
Yeah.
It's not always on the defense then. We're truly trying to say, okay, let's going back to what you were talking earlier in this conversation, where you have disagreement and you can say, okay, we're disagreeing about something. Let's talk this through. There's probably good ideas on both sides here. I think that is part of the way forward. Is we do need to address the things that solve more problems. And I think it sometimes as a hunter and angler myself, the multiple use side of public land, the selfish side of me can be a little fearful of that, but I think it's part of the genius of the public land because not everybody wants to hunt or fish, and I hope everybody can say, yeah, I can see why some people like doing that, and I can see the importance of it to them, but I don't expect everyone to care about it from that way. But there's so many other ways that you can enjoy it because of the multiple use doctrine that is included in with our public land, and I think that renaissance that you're talking about, that's one of the most beautiful sides of it, is it includes that and it recognizes how important that is to moving forward.
And you could still go through the Wind Rivers and climb mountain peaks and go skiing, and you could still go to the desert in Utah. I just love Utah in April. I've been able to go down there, and Americans should all see that desert in April someday, you know?
Yeah.
Part of your birthright.
Yeah, I love that.
It can't be, when you were talking about the Billionaire Podcast, I was thinking about the old criticism of economists. There are people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing.
Yeah.
And
that's pretty good.
But it's like we have it. It's ours to lose.
Yeah.
It's ours to lose. This is a game. We were handed 3 aces and 2 kings, you know.
Yep. And
it's ours to lose.
Yeah, it's ours to lose. I like that. And I really can't think of a better way to wrap this one up. I wanted to talk a little bit about your background, but this just means we got to do the next one in person. So Nicholas doesn't have any internet problems, and I think there's probably a little bit of a lag here on my end because my hotspot is not the best, but I'm glad we could get you on today, Hal. Man, I
lost you.
Oh, did you lose me there? Yeah, so I'm glad we could get you on today, Hal. Despite the poor internet, we need to have this conversation. We need to continue this conversation in person next time. Nicholas and I are kicking around the idea of making a summer visit, not this year probably, but maybe in a couple years, do a trip out to Montana, go see the American Prairie. It's not called APR anymore, but the American Prairie. It was just so much easier when you could say the American Prairie Reserve, but now you got to just say the American Prairie.
I know.
But we'd love to go out and see that, and when we do that, we'll come and meet up with you and continue this conversation. But we always, well, not always, but almost always, finish our podcast by asking our guest if you could snap your fingers and change one thing about the world. Doesn't have to be related to public lands, doesn't even have to be related to conservation. Just if you, Hal Herring, could snap your fingers and change one thing about the world, what would it be?
I'm going to take liberty of doing an abstract one first.
Good. I like it.
I wish that the human, my fellow human species, me, I wish that we could get past the idea that humanity was somehow separate from the planet, the Earth, and that we're not, like, we don't exist alone in this world. That we're a part. That what we do to the Earth, we do to ourselves. Okay, so I wish that we could get rid of the Descartesian concept. I think it was Descartes that kind of started this, built on this nonsense.
Sure.
But the Descartesian concept that we are somehow separate from the planet that sustains our every endeavor, because we're not.
Right.
And the second one is, I wish that we could have a federal and state agricultural policy that prioritized county level food security as much as possible.
I love that.
And did that by subsidizing small producers to work to, and Phillips County, Montana is never going to be the leader in cabbage production.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
But to the extent possible, and that project done with the concept of preserving water resources and buffering creeks, and all, and honoring those private landowners that we're talking about.
Yep.
But I would like to see a sustainable ecological approach to county level food security in America.
Yeah, I love that. I would be proud to pay taxes. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, a guy who's probably another mutual friend of ours, Ted Cook. He's the president of North American Grouse Partnership, and I believe he was on the board with BHA recently. He talks about that when we interviewed him. Just those are resources Americans want. We should be willing to pay for them, and I couldn't agree more. I think that is a wonderful thought, and maybe before the law gets there, we could all participate now by finding one thing that you can produce on your own. One thing that you consume that you can produce on your own. Maybe it's just tomatoes. You have a few tomato plants. Maybe it's watermelon. Maybe it's pork. Whatever it is that you consume. Of course, that's just talking from the food standpoint. There's other things that we consume as well that you could maybe manufacture for yourself. I think that's where we start getting some of those benefits that Hal's talking about, and we can offset the effects of when the big old consumer-driven system that provides those things to us, the effects that has. I think we can start making some of those changes. Start the renaissance now, and I think
start the renaissance now. And what you're talking about there too is to get away from abstraction in one way, just one simple place. I'm not going to be abstract here. By the way, I went out. I have a bunch of starts. I have a big garden, and it frosted this morning here.
No!
I was like, please, no.
Oh no! Yeah.
But dig this. Luckily, I've lived in this place for so long that I plant seeds beside the starts, and the seeds they're barely up, and they're fine. Right, they were below the frost line. It was only like 33 degrees, 32.
Sure.
So it hurt the starts, but the seeds that I put in as alternates, are going to be fine.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. That's a good example of somebody who's doing it. So, well, thank you so much, Hal. How can people follow along with you?
Well, the easiest way, you can go to my website. It hadn't been updated in a long time because I've been working on this book for several years now. But the BHA podcast is the way to catch up. I'm still writing for Field and Stream print magazine.
Awesome.
And we're finishing a conservation column up today. If you hadn't seen the Field and Stream print magazine, it's this big, huge book now that's published twice a year.
Okay.
And it's going to be quarterly, I think, before too long.
Sure.
But the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers podcast and Blast is my main my main outlet these days while I'm working on this book.
Yeah, love it. And what's the? Can you release the name of the book so that our listeners can be looking for it?
Well, so the book is good. I'm not sure what the lead title is, but it's Journeys on America's Public Lands.
Love it. So be looking for that by Hal.
And
I know I'm gonna either purchase a copy myself or use one of my Audible credits to listen to it while I'm working in the fields here at work. But man, I just appreciate I appreciate your mind, Hal. I appreciate your strong voice on behalf of America's public land, and I appreciate how that affects the conservation efforts going around our country. It's not lost on me. And if you're tuning into this, go and get yourself onto a piece of public land. If you do, I think it'll start changing your mind about what its value is. And as we know, conservation happens one mind at a time.